Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're diving into a topic that's pretty close to my heart, the fascinating history of ancient Africa. We're going to be looking at it through the lens of a review of this book, L'Afrique ancienne de l'Acacus au Zimbabwe, 20,000 ans avant notre ère 6 siècles, from a French history website called Cliotech.
Yeah, it's a great review. It really, I think, helps us to get at some of the nuances of African history, beyond kind of the typical narrative.
Exactly. I'm really excited to sort of go beyond just Egypt and uncover some of these lesser-known kingdoms and empires and cultural innovations flourished in ancient Africa. And, I've always been curious about those kind of sweeping narratives we often hear about the rise of civilization and how they tend to be so centered around Europe. This book seems to challenge that head on.
It does. The review really emphasizes the need to move away from a Eurocentric view of history, especially when it comes to Africa. One of the things that really stood out to me was how it tackles that common misconception that Africa was a continent without writing.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one before. What does the book have to say about that?
Well, it really pushes back against that by, pointing to the various writing systems that existed in ancient Africa, like the Meroitic script used in the Kingdom of Kush, or the Giz script in Ethiopia. It argues that by focusing solely on written records, we often overlook the rich oral traditions that have preserved history and knowledge for centuries in many African cultures.
That's a really good point. It reminds me of how some indigenous cultures in the Americas used intricate systems of knotted cords, like the Inca quipu, to record information. I mean, it really makes you realize how diverse knowledge systems can be.
Precisely. And speaking of diverse ways of thinking, the review also highlighted a fascinating concept, this idea of cyclical time in some African cultures.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. I've always thought of history as this kind of linear progression. But cyclical time, what's that all about?
Well, think about it this way. In some West African cultures, for instance, historical events aren't seen as simply belonging to the past. They're woven into the present, constantly being revisited and reinterpreted through rituals, storytelling, and even everyday life. It's not just a straight line from point A to point B. It's more like a spiral, constantly circling back and reinterpreting past events in light of new experiences.
So it's like the past is always present, shaping the present and the future.
Exactly. It challenges our very Western notion of time as a linear progression, and it offers a completely different way of understanding history.
That's mind-blowing. It makes you realize how much our own cultural assumptions shape the way we view the world. Speaking of assumptions, I think a lot of people, myself included, tend to associate ancient Africa almost exclusively with Egypt. But this book seems to be saying there's a much bigger picture.
Absolutely. The book doesn't shy away from acknowledging the grandeur of ancient Egypt, but it's quick to point out that there's a whole universe of history beyond the Nile. For instance, it delves into the kingdoms of Kerma, Napata, and Meroe in Nubia, south of Egypt.
I have to admit, Nubia is a bit of a blind spot for me. What made these kingdoms so unique?
Well, for starters, they weren't simply overshadowed by their powerful neighbor. The kingdom of Kush, centered in Napata and later Meroe, had its own distinct culture, powerful rulers, and even went head-to-head with Egypt at times, even conquering Egypt at one point. They had their own systems of writing, impressive architecture, and a thriving trade network that connected them to other parts of Africa.
Wow, conquering Egypt. I had no idea. It seems like they were a force to be reckoned with. I'm also curious about this debate the book mentions, about the origins of ancient Egypt itself.
Ah, yes, that's a fascinating discussion. You see, there are differing viewpoints among scholars. Some, like Cheikh Anta Diop, argue for a Black African origin, pointing to cultural and genetic connections between ancient Egypt and other regions of Africa. They highlight similarities in art, religion, and social structures.
That makes sense to me. It would be surprising if there weren't strong connections between Egypt and its African neighbors.
Right. But then you have scholars like Leo Frobenius and Miroslav Barta, who lean towards a Saharan or Paleo-African origin. Their arguments are rooted in analyzing rock art and cultural practices found across a broader region, including the Sahara, suggesting a more widespread cultural complex, predating ancient Egypt.
So there are multiple perspectives and interpretations based on different pieces of the puzzle. What an intriguing historical debate. What else does the book highlight beyond Egypt and Nubia?
Well, it also takes us across the continent to the Horn of Africa to explore the Aksumite Empire. They were a major player in trade, controlling routes that stretched all the way to the Indian Ocean. Imagine the cultural exchange happening there, with influences from Africa, Arabia, and even India blending together.
It really paints a picture of an interconnected Africa, buzzing with activity and cultural exchange, long before European colonialism. And to think, we're really just scratching the surface here.
Exactly, and the story gets even richer as we explore how Islam transformed the continent.
Okay, let's delve into the arrival of Islam and its impact on ancient Africa.
One of the first things the review points out is that the arrival of Islam creates an interesting dynamic. In terms of historical sources, in North Africa, there's a wealth of written records in Arabic that offer insights into this period.
That makes sense. Islam places a high value on knowledge and scholarship. But what about south of the Sahara?
Well, that's where things get a bit more challenging. South of the Sahara, we have what the book refers to as a textual silence.
So how do historians piece together the story without those written records?
It becomes a fascinating exercise in historical detective work. We rely more heavily on oral traditions, archaeological evidence, and linguistics to understand how Islam interacted with existing African cultures and belief systems.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah.
What does the book tell us about the impact of Islam in North Africa?
The review highlights the rise of powerful Islamic dynasties, like the Fatimids and Almoravids, who controlled vast territories across North Africa. They had a profound influence on everything from architecture and urban life to scholarship and religious practices. Imagine cities like Kairouan in Tunisia, a stunning example of Islamic architecture and a center of learning.
It's incredible to think about how these dynasties shaped the cultural landscape of North Africa for centuries. But I'm also curious about how Islam spread beyond the Mediterranean coast. Did it make its way into sub-Saharan Africa?
It did, and in fascinating ways. The review also discusses how Islam traversed the Sahara, not as an invading force, but through trade and cultural exchange. This led to the rise of powerful kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, which controlled key trade routes across the Sahara.
Ah, yes. These are the kingdoms that often appear in stories and legends. But I'm guessing the reality was much more complex than the myths. What does the book tell us about the relationship with Islam?
It highlights this nuanced interplay between Islam and existing African traditions. These kingdoms didn't simply abandon their own beliefs and practices. Instead, they often integrated aspects of Islam into their existing social and political structures.
So it was more of a cultural fusion, with African and Islamic traditions blending together.
Exactly. And that fusion led to unique cultural expressions and innovations. The book mentions the example of Timbuktu in the Mali Empire, which became a renowned center of Islamic scholarship and attracted scholars from all over the Islamic world.
It's amazing to think about the Sahara not as a barrier, but as a bridge, facilitating this flow of ideas and knowledge. What else does the book reveal about ancient Africa?
Well, let's shift our focus eastward to the vibrant Swahili coast, a region that was deeply connected to the Indian Ocean trade network.
Ah, the Swahili coast. It's always held a sense of mystery and exotic allure for me. What makes this region so unique?
It was a true melting pot of cultures. The book explains how Bantu-speaking communities along the East African coast interacted with Arab and Persian traders, resulting in the emergence of a unique Swahili culture and language, a blend of African Bantu and Arabic influences.
So we're talking about a cultural and linguistic fusion that was shaped by trade and interaction.
Precisely, and this cultural exchange wasn't limited to language. The book highlights the adoption of Islam by many Swahili communities, the influence of Islamic architecture in their coastal cities, and the development of a thriving trade network that connected them to Arabia, Persia, India, and even China.
Wow, talk about a global network. What a fascinating blend of influences. But I imagine there were other lesser-known parts of Africa that were also experiencing their own unique developments. What else did you uncover in the book?
Well, the review also touches on the Kanem-Bornu Empire, centered around Lake Chad. This empire had a long history, dating back to at least the 8th century, and was deeply involved in the trans-Saharan trade, including, unfortunately, the slave trade.
It's important to acknowledge those darker chapters of history as well. Were there any other hidden gems that surprised you?
Definitely. The book discusses the fascinating archaeological site of Igbo Ukwu in modern-day Nigeria. This site, dating back to the 9th century, reveals evidence of highly sophisticated metalworking techniques.
It seems like every chapter of this book challenges our assumptions about ancient Africa. What else did you find remarkable about Igbo Ukwu?
The level of artistry and craftsmanship, on display in the bronze castings and other artifacts found at Igbo Ukwu, is simply astounding. It challenges the notion that advanced metalworking techniques were solely a European or Asian phenomenon.
So yet another misconception bites the dust. It's incredible to think about the ingenuity and skill that was present in ancient Africa. What other treasures did you find in the book?
Well, the book also takes us to the city of Ife in southwestern Nigeria, known for its incredibly refined terracotta and bronze sculptures, dating back to as early as the 12th century. These artworks, depicting human figures with remarkable detail and naturalism, rival anything found in the world at that time.
It sounds like these discoveries are rewriting our understanding of African art history.
Absolutely. And we're just scratching the surface of what this book has to offer. There's a whole section dedicated to the complexities of understanding ancient African history through different sources, like oral traditions and archaeology.
Now that sounds like a deep dive in itself. I can't wait to explore that further. We'll be back in a moment.
To continue our exploration of ancient Africa, stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into ancient Africa. Before the break, we were talking about some of the incredible artistic and technological achievements of different African civilizations. It really challenges those outdated notions of Africa being behind the rest of the world.
Yeah, and speaking of challenging assumptions, the book spends some time discussing the Congo and Luba kingdoms in Central Africa, which had some really fascinating encounters with European powers.
I'm curious about that. We often hear about European exploration and colonization. From the European perspective, what insights does the book offer about these encounters from an African point of view?
Well, it really highlights the agency and adaptability of African societies. For example, the Congo Kingdom, which had its first contact with the Portuguese in the late 15th century, didn't simply succumb to European pressure. They engaged in diplomacy, trade, and even adopted Christianity, but on their own terms.
I find that conversion to Christianity really intriguing. Was it a forced conversion, or was there something else going on?
The book suggests it was a strategic move by the Congo rulers. They saw the potential benefits of aligning themselves with a powerful European kingdom. The Congo king at the time, Nzinga Nkuwu, even took the Christian name Jonole after his baptism. It's an example of how African leaders navigated the complexities of interacting with European powers.
So it was a way of maintaining some level of control and autonomy in the face of these new challenges.
Exactly. It was a calculated move to engage with the changing global landscape. And it wasn't just about religion. The Congo Kingdom also engaged in trade with the Portuguese, exchanging ivory, copper, and unfortunately enslaved people. This brings up a darker side of these interactions, which the book doesn't shy away from.
That's a good point. It's important to acknowledge the devastating impact of the transatlantic slave trade on African societies. How does the book address that?
It dedicates a whole chapter to discussing the Atlantic opening of Africa and the rise of the slave trade. It's a difficult topic, but it's crucial to understanding this period of history. What's interesting is that the book doesn't just focus on the horrors of the slave trade. It also emphasizes the resilience and resistance of African people throughout this period.
That's an important perspective. So often we only hear about the victimization, not the acts of courage and resistance.
Yes, and the book highlights stories of individuals and communities who fought against enslavement, who escaped, who rebelled, and who preserved their cultures and traditions in the face of unimaginable adversity.
Those stories need to be told. It's a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, the human spirit finds ways to resist and endure. Now, we've been talking about kingdoms and empires, trade and cultural exchange. But I'm wondering, how do we actually know about all this? What kind of evidence do historians use to piece together this incredibly rich history?
That's a great question. And the book wraps up its exploration of ancient Africa with a fascinating discussion on the very topic of historical sources.
Now that you mention it, it has been a whirlwind tour of ancient African civilizations. I'm eager to hear how historians approach understanding this history. Where do they even begin?
The book highlights that reconstructing the history of ancient Africa is like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle. You have to use all the pieces at your disposal and be willing to look at them from different angles. We have written sources, of course, but they're not always complete or readily available, especially for certain periods or regions.
So what other tools do historians use to fill in the gaps?
The book emphasizes the importance of archaeology, for one. Excavations can unearth ancient cities, artifacts, and even human remains, offering tangible evidence of past cultures and ways of life. Imagine uncovering a royal tomb filled with intricate jewelry and pottery, or discovering the remnants of a bustling marketplace, frozen in time.
It sounds like archaeology can transport us back in time, offering glimpses into the daily lives of people who lived centuries ago.
It can. And the book also discusses the importance of linguistics. Analyzing languages can reveal how different cultures interacted and influenced each other, how languages evolved over time, and even provide clues about migration patterns and ancient trade routes.
So language can be a kind of historical record, preserving traces of the past in its sounds and structures.
Exactly. And let's not forget the power of oral traditions. Stories, songs, proverbs, and genealogies passed down through generations can offer invaluable insights into cultural beliefs, social structures, and historical events.
It's like having access to a living library of knowledge, passed down through the generations.
Precisely. But the book is careful to point out that we have to approach all these sources with a critical eye.
What do you mean by that?
Well, each source has its own strengths and limitations. Oral traditions, for instance, can be incredibly rich and insightful, but they can also be subject to change over time as stories are retold and reinterpreted. Similarly, archaeological evidence can be incredibly revealing, but it only offers a snapshot of a particular moment in time.
So it's about using each source to its fullest potential, but also recognizing its limitations and biases.
Exactly. It's about weaving together a tapestry of historical understanding, using all the threads available to us, while acknowledging that the picture is never complete.
That's such a powerful analogy. It reminds me of how historians have to be detectives, piecing together clues from different sources to create a more complete picture of the past. What are some specific examples of how these different sources have helped us understand ancient Africa?
Well, the book highlights the study of pottery styles and decorations. As a way to track trade routes and cultural interactions, imagine finding a piece of pottery with a distinctive pattern in one part of Africa, and then discovering a similar pattern on pottery fragments hundreds of miles away.
That would be a pretty strong indication of some kind of connection, right?
Exactly. It suggests that there was trade or cultural exchange happening between these regions, even if we don't have written records to confirm it.
That's fascinating. It's like following a trail of breadcrumbs through time. What other examples come to mind?
The book also talks about how linguistic analysis has helped us understand the Bantu migrations, a major movement of people across Africa that began thousands of years ago. By tracing the similarities and differences in Bantu languages, we can map out the routes these people took, the regions they settled in, and the interactions they had with other groups.
So language becomes a kind of historical map, tracing the movements and interactions of people across vast stretches of time and space.
Precisely. And then there's the study of rock art. The book mentions the incredible rock paintings found in places like the Tassili Niger in Algeria, which depicts a time when the Sahara was a lush green savanna teeming with life.
Wait, the Sahara wasn't always a desert.
That's right. The Sahara we know today was once a very different environment. And these rock paintings, dating back thousands of years, offer a glimpse into that lost world, showing us the animals that roamed there, the people who hunted them, and even their rituals and beliefs.
That's mind-blowing. It's like a window into a completely different era. I'm starting to see how all these different sources, from archaeology to linguistics to rock art, can come together to paint a richer and more nuanced picture of ancient Africa.
And the book emphasizes that this is an ongoing process. There's still so much we don't know about ancient Africa. And every new discovery, every new interpretation adds another piece to the puzzle.
That's what makes history so exciting. It's not a static subject. It's constantly evolving as we uncover new evidence and re-examine old assumptions. Now, we've been focusing on the historical side of ancient Africa, but the book doesn't stop there. It also delves into the incredible cultural diversity of the continent.
That's right. It takes us back to a time even before the rise of kingdoms and empires, to explore the lives of ancient hunter-gatherer societies, the development of agriculture, and the emergence of unique cultural practices.
Okay, I'm ready to go back even further in time. Let's explore the roots of African culture and the diverse ways of life that have shaped the continent. Welcome back to our deep dive into ancient Africa. Before the break, we were just about to go back even further in time to explore the roots of African cultures, thousands of years really, before the pyramids or the empires.
Yeah, it really is a vast stretch of time. The book takes us back to a period that saw some dramatic climate shifts, a time known as the Grand Arid. Around 20,000 years ago, it was a cold and dry period that significantly impacted human populations and settlement patterns across Africa.
So we're talking about a time when the environment was very different from what we see today. What kind of picture does the book paint of this period?
It describes a time of great upheaval, but also of resilience and adaptation. Imagine vast landscapes turning arid and inhospitable, forcing populations to migrate, adapt to new environments. But as the climate warmed again, these early Africans began to repopulate the continent, developing diverse strategies for survival.
It's incredible to think that. Humans have always found ways to adapt and thrive, even in the face of dramatic environmental changes. So what do we actually know about these early inhabitants of Africa? What were their lives like?
Archaeological evidence, particularly the study of small stone tools, called microliths, provides us with a glimpse into their world. These tools suggest they were skilled hunter-gatherers, moving across vast distances. In search of food and resources, the book highlights key areas of settlement, like the Maghreb, the Nile Valley, East Africa, and Southern Africa, each presenting unique challenges and opportunities.
It's like a giant detective story, right? Using these tiny tools and scattered settlements to piece together the story of these early humans. What a challenging yet fascinating puzzle to solve. What else do we learn about this period?
This story gets even more intriguing as we move into the later prehistoric period, particularly in the Sahara region.
The Sahara. I have to admit, it's hard for me to picture the Sahara as anything other than a vast, desolate desert. What was it like during this period?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The book describes how the Sahara, during a period from 10,000 to 2,000 years ago, was a completely different landscape. Instead of the arid desert we know today, it was a vibrant savanna, teeming with life, lakes and rivers, supporting diverse communities of hunter-gatherers and pastoralists.
Wow, a green Sahara. It's amazing to think about how dramatically environments can change over time. What evidence do we have for this? It sounds almost unbelievable.
It does, doesn't it? But the evidence is there. The book points to archaeological discoveries, but also to those incredible rock paintings found in places like the Tasselina Jur in Algeria. These paintings, created thousands of years ago, depict a world of lush landscapes, abundant wildlife, human interactions that completely challenge our modern perceptions of the Sahara.
Those rock paintings sound incredible. It's like a window into a lost world. I can only imagine what it must have been like to see those images emerge from the rock, revealing a world so different from our own. What do these paintings tell us about the people who lived in this green Sahara?
They offer glimpses into their daily lives, their rituals, their interactions with animals, and even their beliefs. You can see scenes of hunting, fishing, herding cattle, dancing, and even what appear to be spiritual ceremonies. It's a vibrant tapestry of human life, frozen in time.
It really makes you wonder what they would think of the Sahara as it is today. Did these communities stay in the Sahara as it dried out? Or did they migrate to other regions?
As the Sahara began to dry out, it triggered a series of migrations and adaptations. Some communities moved towards the Nile Valley, where the fertile land supported the development of agriculture, while others adapted to the changing environment. Becoming more reliant on pastoralism and herding, it was a time of great change and movement across the continent.
It seems like these climate shifts played a significant role in shaping the course of African history. Did this shift to agriculture happen around this time?
The book looks into that. This process of Neolithization, the transition from hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities. And it seems like this shift happened in different parts of Africa at different times, influenced by a combination of factors like climate change, population growth, and the exchange of ideas and innovations.
Well, there wasn't just one agricultural revolution in Africa. It was a more complex and gradual process.
Exactly. And while some communities in North Africa and the Sahara were adopting agriculture, other parts of Africa were experiencing their own unique developments. For instance, the book talks about the emergence of pastoral communities in East Africa, herding cattle and other livestock across vast savannas.
It's a reminder that African history isn't monolithic. There were so many diverse ways of life evolving simultaneously.
Absolutely. And remember the archaeological site of Igbo Ukwu in Nigeria that we discussed earlier.
Yes, the one with the incredible bronze castings.
Well, that site, dating back to the 9th century, also falls within this period of cultural development and innovation. It showcases the technological skills and artistry present in ancient Africa, challenging the notion that Africa was somehow behind other parts of the world in terms of development.
Another example of how this book dismantles those Eurocentric narratives. What else does the book reveal about this period of cultural innovation?
It explores the origins and spread of iron technology in Africa. This was a pivotal moment as iron tools revolutionized agriculture, warfare, and even social structures. The book talks about how different regions developed their own unique approaches to ironworking, reflecting their specific environments and needs.
So it wasn't just a matter of adopting a technology, it was about adapting it and making it your own.
Precisely. And the book also highlights the importance of other metals, like gold in ancient Africa. It wasn't just a material for adornment. It played a significant role in trade, cultural expression, and even spiritual beliefs.
It's fascinating to see how materials like that played such complex roles in shaping these cultures and societies. It feels like we've been on an incredible journey, covering thousands of years of history and exploring such a wide range of cultures and achievements.
It's been quite a deep dive, hasn't it? And we've only just scratched the surface of what this book has to offer.
I know, it makes me want to go out and learn even more. What are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should keep in mind from this exploration of ancient Africa?
I think what stands out to me is the sheer diversity and complexity of African history. It's not a single story. It's a tapestry of countless stories woven together over millennia. And each thread, each discovery, each reinterpretation adds to the richness and vibrancy of that tapestry.
That's such a powerful image. And it's a good reminder that history is never truly finished. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to reevaluate.
Absolutely. And when it comes to ancient Africa, there's a whole world of knowledge out there waiting to be explored, challenged, and celebrated.
Well, this deep dive has certainly sparked my curiosity. I'm ready to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep challenging those old assumptions. If you're feeling inspired too, I encourage you to seek out this book and continue your own deep dive into ancient Africa. And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, and remember, history is not just about the past. It's about understanding the present and shaping the future. As you learn more about ancient Africa, think about the connections, the echoes, and the legacies that continue to shape our world today.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through ancient Africa. Until next time, keep on learning, keep on questioning, and keep on diving deep.